I love it. So basically what you're saying, and I think this ties in great with Leadership Highway
I think so.
is that we have a roadmap to get to our destination, but women and men are taking completely different paths. Hey, welcome back to Leadership Highway. I'm Coach McCurdy. This is the Fast Track podcast that will help you 10x your impact, bust some myths, and help you get out of your own damn way. Guys, I get excited by people, and today we have an incredible guest. We have Harvard-educated social researcher, speaker, and consultant Shaunti Feldhahn with us today, and she is going to talk about the differences between men's brains and women's brains and drop some bombs on us, honestly, about some things that you've never thought about before that are going to meaningfully change how you relate to others, both at home and in the workplace. Welcome, Shaunti. So Shaunti, on Leadership Highway, we try to highlight that journey of leadership development, the things that drove you to success. And in it, we identify and break down those critical moments, that minute where one big idea just changed the dynamics of how you function and how you think about leadership. I wonder, when I share that with you, what comes to mind?
There are several pivotal moments that come to mind. It's interesting that you asked that because there's several pieces that I can see where I was learning certain skills. And for me, the big aha moment had been, oh, that's why I learned that skill. Right? Like years later, oh, okay, I did not realize how important that was going to be later. So for example, this is going to sound so funny, but I was an analyst on Wall Street, which, analyzing large Japanese banks apparently has nothing to do with becoming a social researcher on relationships and an author. Like those two things wouldn't seem to have anything to do with one another. And yet, working on Wall Street in this incredibly demanding analytical job, like statistical analysis, it was the same, and research, it was like the same skill set that I ended up using in a way that I would argue is much more important for people. So that was kind of fun, was kind of that realization, oh, that's what that was about. The other thing that's just kind of silly, but it does actually matter, is I am doing all these events. I do women's leadership events. I do women's conferences. I do marriage seminars at churches. I, go all over the map. And I realized, you know what? I kind of grew up on stage. I was a theater nerd. And so suddenly, that's what that experience was for. Just I'm using it in just a very different way to connect with an audience.
I love that because we're all about, as we grow, we never stop growing, but what we learned, they say what got you there won't get you there. At the same time, what got you there can be then retooled and repurposed to get you to the next thing. And for those of you who are just getting to know Shaunti, just one of the most amazing women I've ever had the pleasure of working alongside. But Shaunti went from Wall Street, doing all kinds of high-intensity business transactions in a very male-dominated world, to becoming a social researcher and a speaker and best-selling author, 25 books, people, 25, on relationships. I was getting ready for this podcast. I was going to bring all of my Shaunti books and realized I had an entire shelf. I don't have a Shaunti stack. I have a Shaunti shelf. But when we talk about social research, I have to tell you, until I met you, I did not know what that was. So for everyone out here that sort of is thinking about doing something cool, what is a social researcher?
So a social researcher can do many things, but essentially that's a fancy way of saying I talk to a lot of people and try to understand patterns that matter. My whole business for 20 something years now has been trying to dig out the little things that make a big difference in people's lives and relationships, right? Like, who has time to read? Well, you might. I don't. Has time to read the big, thick books and the big tomes. I'm like, no thanks. I want like the bite-sized podcast, for example. And so the whole point is, all right, if you are just going to make a small change, what is it that's going to have a really big difference over time? What is it that's going to be the most impactful small change? And so that's an example of what I do with this, is I do a study on something that is going to help people and then write a book about it.
I love it. Well, one of my favorite books is your book. I have it right here, For Women Only. And for those of you who are listening, you can't see, but I am holding the book For Women Only. I own not just one, but I have about 3 copies of this book. I give it to friends. But as a social researcher, it sounds like your specialty is asking questions. So in some ways, pressure on me to ask you the best possible
No
questions.
pressure, Erica. No pressure.
But let me ask you this: what is your methodology for asking a great question? How do you think about a great question?
Well, honestly, that right there is a great question.
I'll take it.
Because candidly, when I am trying to dig out something, it is often something that someone has not actually thought through before. It's the kind of thing that, Erica, what was it that led you to recognize you wanted to transition to being a coach, right? To building this whole new business. And you're like, I probably know the answer to that, but maybe I haven't articulated it to myself. Now, you probably have. Just like
Only because 3 people have asked that question of me. But when we think about that, I feel like there's this great questions. How do you share your story? And the fact that you're our question expert, I find as a female that I am consistently told I use too many words, that maybe too emotional, to this, to that. I've had it said to me before, Erica, you only get so many words in a lifetime. You don't have to use them all today. So when we think about words and questions and explaining and getting to the heart of it, I think you're the expert on women versus men. I wonder if you'd share just a few observations that kind of define how do you think about us.
It's a great question, because yes, that is one of the things that I've studied, is what are some of the brain wiring differences between men and women? What are some of the things that lead to this disconnect? Because I can almost guarantee you that you don't have to use all the questions in your life today was not said to you by a woman, right? I would just...
No, it was not. No, it was not.
I would just hazard a guess at that. And so here's one of the things that we actually learned when we were doing the research for The Male Factor, which is our book to help women in the workplace, high potential, high capacity women, who maybe are like, why am I not advancing as quickly as some of the men in my group? And some of the time, it turns out it's how we're perceived by the dominant culture, which in many businesses is men, right? Most businesses are still very male-led, right? And so it's a strategic advantage if you can actually understand it's like another culture. It's like going into Japan or something. You wouldn't go in without understanding how what you were going to do and say was going to be perceived. And it's the same thing. And so I was doing the research with men, especially executive men, high level, folks who work with a lot of talented women. And one of the factors that we found that often unintentionally held very talented women back is that they were perceived as scatterbrained because they used a lot of words. And
yes, we do use a lot of words, and we use a lot of emotion.
And that is also very common. Now, there's exceptions to this, but I think on one of my surveys, I actually tested that, and it was something like 82 or 85% of men. I have to look it up. But for most women, emotion is built into our brains. Literally the limbic system, the processing of our brains functions and is fueled by emotion. In some ways, it kind of is sort of like the oil in the engine of a car. It's one of the things that helps us function better. For men's brains, they actually have to set aside emotion in order to think clearly. And so what that means is that if they look at you as a woman and perceive you're being emotional, and there's all sorts of things that means, they wouldn't be able to think clearly if they had that much emotion. They look at you and they assume you're not thinking clearly either.
Wow, that is huge, because what I hear you saying actually is that women's brains are a very complex machine, and that male brains are much more compartmentalized. So
literally,
I'm feeling better about myself all the way through this. Keep going.
There is literally a brain wiring difference, and because one of the things that I do when it's something that is way too complicated for my mind to grasp, and I will interview like neuroscientists, for example, and say, I'm seeing this in the data. Help me understand what I'm seeing. Like, why am I seeing this from a neuroscience standpoint? And so I was talking to a very eminent neuroscientist who was trying to dumb it down to my level because like every other word that he said, I didn't understand. So he was trying to get it to a level that, a layperson could grasp it. And I said, what I hear you saying is that it's almost like that men's brains are compartmentalized almost like a supercomputer, where they have to like go really deep into all this processing of one thing at a time, and then they go on to the next supercomputer and it processes the next thing. Whereas women's brains, it sounds like you're saying it's like 10 million personal computers all networked together and all running all at the same time and processing all these different things at the same time. I said, I think that's what I'm hearing from you. Like the same IQ, the same processing power, but you get there completely differently. And he spent about 10 minutes going, oh no, that's too simplistic. It's blah, blah, blah. And he tried to explain it more. And then he said, yeah, you're right. That's a better way of explaining it. And so
I love it. So basically what you're saying, and I think this ties in great with Leadership Island here, is that we have a roadmap to get to our destination, but women and men are taking completely different paths.
Often, at about an 80% level. There's always, in this, one of the reasons we did the surveys, in these big nationally representative surveys, is if 80% of women said one way, that means by definition 20% didn't. Right? And so we're all an individual. It's the key is, from a leadership perspective, I am constantly having to think myself and tell other people, you have to be attuned to how you're being heard, not just what you think you're saying. And sort of that perception, understanding how you're perceived, is really honestly a key to unlocking so much that is beneficial for you as a leader.
All right, so let me ask you this. If I would say, Shaunti, nobody understands communication in the workplace the way you do. So actually I have a couple of questions. My question at the end. But the first one I want to ask is, can we bust a few myths? What are some of the misconceptions about men and women in the workplace? Or we could even make it general, whatever you want, but I want to bust some stuff. So,
I have plenty one of the things that I enjoy doing is, for example, busting that myth with men that we just talked about. We talked about it from the women's side, but now picture me telling a group of men, just so you know, what you see as emotion is not a sign that your female colleagues, the logic has stopped. Like, I can be pretty upset and still be thinking clearly. Thank you very much.
I love that. So I'm assuming this ties into one of your current projects, the male factor, and you've got for women only, for men only, we have the male factor, and now we're tying in mental health as well.
All of this is related. And part of this is to help, talking about busting the myths, right? For example, another myth that a lot of male executives, bosses, clients might think about a female colleague is that this concept of too many words, right, that we were just talking about.
Story about
I'm gonna circle back to the too many words. It is interesting for most women, I won't say all, but for most women statistically, one of the things that is very common for women leaders, it doesn't matter whether it's a man or a woman on our team that we are leading and we're saying, hey, tell us about what happened in that meeting with the client, for example. Most women actively want the words. We actively want to know, here's what happened, here's what I thought, here's sort of the analysis of it, here's the description, so that I know that you've done your analysis properly. You've told me all the steps, so I know that when you say, so here's my recommendation, you can go, yep, you thought about this, you thought about this, you thought about this, because you told me you thought about those things.
Right. We want all of the steps.
We do.
Places with all the process. Because is it a trust thing? Do we not trust that other people
It's not. It's a processing thing. It's a processing thing. It is, okay, yeah, that makes, okay, so they asked that and they told me that they considered that, and okay, great. So by the time we get to the end of the story, awesome. We either said, you did it right, you did it wrong, let's go forward, let's go back and ask this question, whatever it is. By the time you get to the end of that, we're good, done. We know what to do. It's interesting that for most men, all those words actually get in the way of them being able to listen to the story. Because this is the way one guy put it. He's a very, very high level executive with a lot of experience. And he said, look, while you're telling me the story about the client meeting, I don't know if what you're going to say at the end is, so isn't that interesting? Or, so we lost the client. Like, I don't know where you're going, and it actively makes it difficult to listen. And so that's one reason why you hear sometimes this, can we get to the point? Now, getting to the point will not work if you are, for example, a guy who reports to a female boss. Yeah, okay, so she may want you to get to the point, but many female brains will need to know that you did all the analysis and ask you to go through all those steps. And so one of the solutions that we often tell both men and women is find out what each other's preferences are. Are you a tell me the end of the story up front so I can listen? Or are you no, I want to hear all the steps? And it's not always going to be gender related, but a big chunk of the time it will be.
I love that. So you do a lot of work to help move the needle, and particularly in that women's leadership space. So I'm wondering if we were to boil down to a couple of key ideas when you're working to move the needle in the women's leadership space, what would you say are the handful of big ideas?
So one of the big ideas is not popular, but it's important. And that is for everybody. This is not just a women's leadership thing. It's an everybody thing. It is what I said earlier. You would never go in to a foreign culture. You would never go to Brazil. You'd never go to Japan, wherever it is, without doing some homework on what are the unwritten rules, right? What are the unspoken expectations? What might I trip over without having any idea? You would never do that if you're astute, right? And yet we do that all the time with one another. And the men-women thing, that's 50% of the population, right? Like this is...
It is. I just wonder what that rule book is. No, wait. I have the rule book. It's for women only.
The workplace version is called the male factor. So one of the big ideas is this kind of concept that a lot of us haven't ever thought about before, which is, oh, maybe I should think of this, male colleague, male boss, male client, male subordinate, as maybe they grew up with a different kind of brain, a different kind of culture that's every bit as real as if I was walking into a foreign country, and to do a little bit of learning about what those things are, rather than thinking, well, those things shouldn't exist. Well, okay, maybe they shouldn't, but if they do, then it's in our best interest to at least understand them. We don't have to do anything differently if we don't want to, but at least we'll know what's going on.
I love that. I really do. I spend a lot of time with my clients helping identify rhythms and patterns and the order of operations and all of these different tools and techniques that help us empower the communication to help get the most optimal result. And this is such a cool tie-in. I can't tell you how many times we talk about a rhythm or a pattern, and then I'll have someone share with me what they said that they thought was that pattern, and sort of get it wrong. Or I guess we don't get it wrong these days, but maybe it wasn't optimal. What one person hears is not what the other person perceives. And I can tell you, as a female who's been an executive in the workplace, I've had all kinds of feedback, and a lot of it has to do with words or energy or emotion or enthusiasm, and so many things that are just simply the way I show up. So for those people listening who show up in ways where they get what they perceive as criticism, what is your advice?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I was going to jump in and say, but you have to be authentic to who you are. I mean, and that's another thing, by the way, working with women, for any men listening to this, is that if you are not authentic and open up a little bit, the average female brain doesn't 100% trust you, because they know there's something not quite there. It's not fully genuine. I don't really know you. And so I can't completely trust you. Now, you can still maybe work together, do great, whatever, but just be aware that that's an issue. And so about being authentic and about showing up for who you are, it's funny because over and over and over again, I would do these interviews with men. And, you've known me for a long time, Erica. You knew me during some of this research where I would be like, oh my gosh, I had the best interview with a guy on an airplane, because I would hit up whoever I was sitting next to on the airplane for 2 hours. And I would have these fantastic comments from people, because they could be completely honest. I had no idea who they were. Right? I didn't know their name. I didn't know their business. They could be very, very non-politically correct. They could be very candid about how they actually thought, which is what I wanted to know. I'm like, I don't want the filtered version. I want to know what you're actually thinking. And one of the things I heard over and over from men about women specifically is, please do not change to try to be like a man. You have to be yourself. I heard that over and over. And my next question to them would be, okay, I hear that. I appreciate that. Thank you for saying that, Mr. Anonymous person sitting next to me on the airplane. But, you've spent about 15 minutes before this telling me about these perceptions that makes me think what you're saying is I need to change. That's what I think I'm hearing from you. And this one guy, he approached it perfectly. He kind of thought for a second, he's like, yeah, it does sound like that, but that's not what I mean. And he goes, okay, here's what it is. If you go to France, you are not going to be understood if you just speak louder in English.
Nice.
You have to speak French, but you don't have to be a different person.
Nice.
And the analogy, right, is
big idea. We do have, if we want relationships and if we want impact, and so many of us, particularly the folks that are listening to Leadership Highway and the people who love and adore your books and research. We want impact. All right. So Shaunti, I love this idea of being authentic. I love this idea of not necessarily changing, but understanding the language so that maybe we can incorporate, mirror some of those techniques so that we can have bigger impact. Impact is so important. But there's a lot of people, particularly women out there in the workforce, who feel a bit isolated. They're trying to break into different levels in their organization. And honestly, a lot of times, even the other women are all trying to fight their own battles. And so there's not really a great community. As we work towards the end of this, I wonder if you would say a few things on how you think about mentorship. How do we handle that?
Well, the data is really clear. There has been a lot of data over the years on women's leadership and some of the things that actually work to move the needle and bring women into executive ranks, especially. And mentorship is one of those things that, especially when it's paired with sponsorship, meaning you have high-level fans who champion you, it's really, really important and really effective. However, I will say that to get to mentorship, one of the things that I think is overlooked is the need for building supportive and effective community with other like-minded, high-potential women who are taking the process seriously and kind of have the same goal of where they want to go. Because that is a factor, community is a factor that's been proven to be effective and important for everything from like mental health to everything. And it's one of the things that you often don't get into any kind of a mentoring relationship unless you have opportunities to build real relationships with other women, especially. And so I often tell women, like, if you don't have for example, a women's networking group at your organization, start one. If there just aren't that many, do a book club. Like, find some way, meet for lunch every other Thursday. Find some way to develop those real relationships, because from those is often where a genuine relationship will be built that can be a good mentor, as opposed to, hey, would you be my mentor? I've had so many people who I just don't know at all say, would you mentor me? And I'm like, I would not do the best job of mentoring you because A, I don't know you. B, we don't have a relationship. We don't really have any opportunity to spend time together, see one another. And so it has to be something that's arising out of genuine relationship that has to be built.
I love that. All right. Last question before we roll into our wrap up. What are we researching next? What's next?
Mental health. Yes. Let me tell you, we had the pandemic of COVID-19, and in the middle of that, we started another pandemic of mental health issues. And it's been an issue for many years, but there's a lot, when you talk about the little things that make a big difference, there is a lot that can be actually done that most people just don't recognize makes a big difference. So that is what we are researching next.
I love that. All right. So if people want to follow you, buy your books, support this new initiative, support you and your ministry, how do they do that?
So the easiest way is to go to Shaunti.com. So it's SHAUNTI.com. I knew you were going to ask them to ask me to spell it, Erica.
Yeah, and since I talked over you, what is the best way to get in touch with you?
So the best way is to go to Shaunti.com, SHAUNTI.com. And, just because it's a complicated name, I apologize in advance, but that has all of the connections to all my social media. I'm pretty easy to find because I have such an unusual name on social media. And yes, anybody who is interested in supporting the research, we are in the middle of looking for sponsorships for the funding right now. So yes.
Excellent. And I just want to reiterate again, for the people who don't know Shaunti, you need to pick up one of her books. You need to go to her website. You need to start listening to the information. Shaunti is a brilliant, Harvard-educated social researcher. 25 books, more than 3 million copies, 26 languages. We are talking heavyweight women's leadership guru right here and social researcher. So, Shaunti, I just can't tell you how honored I am that you came on Leadership Highway. I hope our listeners pick up a nugget or 2 or 10 or 15 that they can take with them from this. And I hope you'll come back when your next
Absolutely
comes out. All right. Thank you. Guys, that's all the time we have for today. Please make sure to connect with Shaunti, buy her books. You'll be glad you did. That's why we started Leadership Highway, to bring to light stories that showcase innovative thinking, that bust some myths. I want you to like, follow, subscribe to Leadership Highway so that we can bring more incredible guests like Shaunti to our show. I personally got a lot out of this episode myself, and I cannot thank Shaunti enough for coming on this show. Remember, Leadership Highway is the fast track podcast that's going to help you 10x your impact, bust some myths, break barriers, and help you get out of your own damn way. So to everyone out there trying to increase their impact and make a meaningful difference, keep your eyes on the road ahead. It's a shit show out there, and it's up to you to drive your success. Until next time.